Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our publishing and coaching services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by David Eisley, author of Philology, The Secret Code of Leadership. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You ready to get started?
I am.
All right, question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually didn't start out to necessarily write a book. I had written a bunch of articles for LinkedIn and started doing some speaking, and then ended up in a graduate program in organized leadership. And I had written hundreds and hundreds of pages, all the same theme, but it wasn't until I kind of did a speaking engagement where someone asked me, hey, where can I read more about this? And I thought, well, I've written all of it. Let me put it together in some kind of coherent fashion, and maybe I have a book here. But the reflection I have now is the one piece of advice is don't try to accomplish too much in your book. I mean, have a centralized theme, something you can succinctly describe, rather than, I think my book tended to be a little more rambling, all-encompassing. I eventually ended up with stress makes you stupid, but it took me a long way to get there. So be able to explain what your idea is succinctly, so when people ask, they understand the message you're trying to convey.
So for your book, it sounds like you repurposed a lot of your different posts and articles and basically turned that into the book. Is that correct?
Yeah, I kind of inadvertently was writing a book for the last several years, and my main audience was people that worked for me, people that I knew, or in any kind of speaking engagement I had. This is what they seemed to like to hear about. So as I kind of came to that conclusion, I wrote more about it, researched more about it, went through a master's degree program about it. So I felt like I had enough to say on the subject.
When you bring up a great point, that's one thing I always mention to my clients is if you have content on your website, if you've done posts, if you've done different blog entries and everything, one of the best things you can do is just take that information, repurpose it, add it into your book, and just expand on those points. And it's amazing how quickly you can develop a book by doing that.
Yeah, and you refine your own thinking along the way. I mean, you look back and you certainly may have evolved on certain subjects or had more background, more experiences, and it certainly adds to a richer book for sure.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Yeah, and for me, I self-published the book, and so there was a steep learning curve. And just the nature of my personality is I just kind of dive right in and try to figure it out along the way. And, I did read books on how to publish on Amazon and, what were some marketing ideas. But, I certainly can't say I did it right the first time. So I had to do a couple revisions, from formatting, getting the cover right, something I was comfortable with, what looked good, what was clean, what would look good in print. And then, even the harder part is when you did finally get published, now what do you do with it, right? No one really tells you that. So it's an experience that, looking back, I wish I would have been more prepared for. I wish I would have done a little bit more research on. But a lot of times there's no better experience than actually just going through something and trial and error.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. That's the same philosophy I had. I did my first book, finished it up about 3 years ago, and I literally spent that entire month after the draft is done thinking, okay, what am I need to do from this point? And I just dug in for multiple hours every single day and just learned as much as I could about the process, about finding an editor, formatter, learning about what sells well with book covers, sales copy, book description. It's just amazing how many things you have to learn. And when you don't have guidance, it's a very challenging area. Was a big reason why I transitioned into book publishing, because there's so many people out there where they want to get their books done, but they have no idea where to start.
Right, and editing is a big piece of that. I didn't definitely underestimated the importance of that. So if I had one piece of advice about getting published is get a good editor, because no matter how careful you are, No matter how many times you run it through Grammarly, I can assure you you're going to miss stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I always recommend that you outsource more than anything is the editing process. And hopefully you find a good editor that you can stick with for all your books. I was very lucky. I found an amazing editor for my first book, and I've used her for all 13 of mine, and I recommend her to my clients as well. And it's so great when you can have someone that you work with from multiple books, because they get it. They understand your voice, your tone, and they can set you straight going, hey, your book needs to go in this direction, or you missed this, and they're not afraid to tell you that.
Right. Yeah, and they're not cheap, so I mean, you have to set that aside if you're going to do it right, to get a good editor. But like I said, ultimately you're going to be left with a finished product, and it's not that you can't go in and make changes, but it does become cumbersome. I mean, you want to launch it correctly.
Absolutely, but the nice thing is, though, if you do screw it up, you can typically get updates done within 2 hours. And I'll tell you a story.
Yeah.
So even my most recent book, 30,000 words. I thought everything was perfect, went through every single thing, multiple editors. I did the proofing myself as well, just to make sure everything was done right. And the funny thing is, a few months later, it was actually this past weekend, and I noticed I made a minor error. It was a little thing, but it was in the back of the book. So fortunately, it wasn't the actual content, but it was in the back of the book on the About the Author section. I'm going, how in the world did I do that? 13 books out there. I've got all these clients that I've helped. So it's just one of those things where done is better than perfect. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. And if you do find a mistake, you can go back and fix it. And within 2 hours, we had everything updated for all the different versions of the book. Everything was done, good to go. But yeah, it's one of those frustrating things that really, that type of small mistake, but the nice thing is that you can go back in and you can get things fixed very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you just don't want to get a review like I got, which is, hey, great book, but too many editing errors. So because that just takes away from the review completely.
Yeah, I think they're fairly merciful if you have a couple minor ones, but yeah, once you get over 5 or 10, then you get some of those grammar people. I'll just put it nicely, grammar people. There's some other phrases out there. Yeah, that's another one. There's a few other rougher versions, but you're right. There's some people that just live for that. But the nice thing is, most of your audience, 99% of them, they want to hear a good story. They want something they can connect with you with having your story, having your book out there. So the nice thing is, you really don't have to worry about that too much, but you're right. There's always that small percentage, and I think that's one of the things that we as authors struggle with. But the thing is, we have to realize is it's only a very small percent that do that.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely, and that leads certainly right into the marketing aspect of it.
Yeah, and
the more reviews you get, then that single one isn't so devastating. Right?
Absolutely. And as we transition into marketing, I'd like to ask you to share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that worked well.
Yeah, and I think that the first question you have to ask yourself is, okay, how am I going to use this book? Am I marketing it to sell and get rich, or am I using it for speaking engagements? Am I using it as a teaching tool for, in my case, I train salespeople. So, for me, I was never under any delusion that I was going to necessarily get rich off the book or sell 1 million copies, but I did want to use it as a tool, and it's been very helpful. I definitely use it to get speaking engagements, and that's a big part of what I use it for, and it all circles back around to that question that I got during the one speaking gig I had, where, hey, is there a book that talks about this? And now I can say, yeah, there is. I wrote it. So that's a big one. But I've done Facebook groups. I've done the Kindle giveaways. I'm doing a local authors day here at the library. I'm lucky enough where my mom's a librarian, so she got my book in the library. That helps. So any opportunity you can get to speak about what you've written. I was on a podcast called Sales Babble, which is sales geared, but certainly my book, even though it's about leadership, dovetails into managing people. And so that's really what I looked for, more on the guerrilla marketing side. You can certainly buy reviews and buy whatever influence you want, but if you're going to do it organically, you have to put yourself out there as much as possible.
Yeah, and buying reviews, that's always a sticky wicket because that's something that I've always steered clear of just because with Amazon the way it is right now with how they're cracking down their reviews, that's one area I definitely don't recommend people go in just because that really
Yeah.
is a sticky wicket. And even when you give your book away, it's one of the things where you mention to them, hey, when you give the review, if you want to mention that you received an advance review copy, that's great because sometimes you have to be
Right.
careful with that part of the process. Now, I did want to ask you about your library strategy. So, I know you
Yeah.
mentioned that that your mom was a librarian and she helped get your book in there. But what are some
Yeah.
strategies that our listeners could utilize to be able to get their books into libraries?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, a library is going to have a form that you can just simply fill out. I'm sure you can find it on their website, where you can offer your book as as part of their collection. Excuse me. And then once you have that, I mean, they're always looking to promote local authors. So certainly, if it's a local library, they have like a symposium where local authors show up. You can put whatever books you have published. They have speakers. So it's not only an opportunity to sell your book, but it's an opportunity to mingle with other authors. It's an opportunity to again, just give your book more exposure. The hardest thing to do is not get lost in the crowd. I mean, there's a lot of books out there, and especially on a topic like leadership, you also have to look at your niche. There's been a lot written about that as well. So, you're constantly asking the question, how am I going to stand out? Well, how is someone even going to find this among the sea of other things written on it? And if you feel like you've written something of value, I mean, you just have to be courageous enough to talk to as many people about it. And that's just one avenue. But you're exposing yourself to that many more readers that can read the book.
So having your book at the library, you mentioned there's also events that coincide with that. How does that work to have
Yep.
events at the library?
Yeah, so I was invited to a local authors day, and what that is you go there, you have a table. Again, other local authors are there. It's about a 5 or 6 hour event where you can talk to people in the library. They can come up to your table. You can talk about your book. You can sell your book right there. And again, it's a way to get exposure, and that's the hardest thing to do.
And many of these libraries have these type of events throughout the U.S. and Canada, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. This particular library, which is in Naperville, Illinois, does this event once a year. So they're pretty, they're held pretty often. And again, I haven't necessarily looked into other libraries, but the local authors are a big deal for them. They want to promote them.
And then they actually give you a free area where you can sell your book, promote it, even do book signings and even readings, it sounds like.
Yep. Absolutely, absolutely. So, and even if you do podcasts such as this, you can give away free copies of your book, sign those. I mean, you want avenues for audience, right? The likelihood that they're going to find your book, like I said, on Kindle, especially if you're a first-time author like me, that they don't know you. I mean, you just need to get people to know you, right? Know what your message is. I can certainly promote it during a speaking engagement easily if they've liked what I've had to say. Facebook groups are a great way to interact with people because now you can buy traffic there too. The traffic alone doesn't get you very well. You also have to have an engaging page. I mean, you have to write, interact with the followers that you get. And you can do a lot on LinkedIn too. I mean, I've got over 1,100 connections on LinkedIn, and every so often I post about my book. Especially, I try to connect with people that would have interest in that. You have to know who your audience is too.
Yeah, I had a guest on recently who was talking about LinkedIn because, as you know, a lot of people when they have their books out there, they'll potentially promote it on Facebook. They'll even have people vote on their covers. But what he found was to have people vote on the covers on LinkedIn because so few people actually utilize that strategy. And he noticed the engagement was so much more because the way that the Facebook algorithms go these days, it all depends on your content, and they could either push it down or they can promote it. But with LinkedIn, it's a much better outlet from what he discovered that worked really well with promoting his launch and also promoting the different book covers to have people vote on them.
Yeah, and it's the audience I'm looking for. I mean, I wrote a business book, so they're very willing. People are very willing to engage on LinkedIn, so you can get some really good feedback. And that's where you're going to find people that have podcasts about this kind of subject, people that teach this kind of subject. People that you can get into a lengthy conversation with. They're very willing to engage on LinkedIn about this kind of thing too, where Facebook's a little more shorter attention span kind of space.
Yeah, I agree completely with you. Well, speaking of libraries, speaking of books, I'd like to ask you, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So I almost have to separate it by genre, right? So
Yep.
I would say that there's really two books that have influenced me a great deal, especially as they relate to the book I wrote. And one was Thinking in Systems by Denala Meadows, and the other one was Coherence by Dr. Alan Watkins. And this is really a synergy of those two things. And what it taught me was to really look at any problem more holistically. The problem's rarely with a person. It's usually with the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you'll start learning about feedback loops and, leverage points. Some things matter more than others. And, especially when you're talking about leadership or management, I mean, we're leading people. It's of utmost importance that you understand how people think, how they tick, what's important to them in order to communicate better. If you kind of go back to the tenet of any marketing, it's usually, aspirational. People never look 5 years into the future and say, oh, I'm going to be fatter and poorer. You're always looking for a better life, you're going to be thinner, you're going to be in shape, you're going to be rich. We want to be better, right? And understanding that the human body is a system, right, that how we think is greatly influenced how we feel, and so physiology and emotion is a big part of our behavior, really was a turning point for me, not only in helping myself get better, but also in managing other people.
Yeah, two things that I built my company on was systems and frameworks, and having those and utilizing them. And it's funny how it applies to literally every single thing in life.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was one of the challenges of writing this, because I wrote under the lens of leadership, but really, learning how you work and how to control your physiology and how to think better. I mean, it really affects every aspect of your life. I mean, it affects what kind of, husband you are, what kind of parent you are, what kind of athlete you are, how you handle problems, how you overcome adversity, how you lead people, and so, that's both the blessing and the curse of writing about it is, how do you narrow it down to actionable information on leadership, right? And not, make it encompass everything, which is tough to do.
That's very true. Well, David, for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why? Yeah,
well, my favorite quote was from, actually a Stoic quote by Marcus Aurelius. It's, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. And it's certainly a nice reminder that, to how important it is to overcome obstacles. But for me, I've had a son who's gone through some challenges over the last 5 years and hasn't been able to go to school, and has just basically uncontrollable motor tics, and a lot of that influenced my wanting to understand more about the mind and the body, but also your life changes, right? And you have two choices. You can either sink and give up, or you can accept kind of the new normal and go through and kind of make the obstacle a benefit. Okay, he hasn't gone to school, he hasn't been able to, interact socially with people, but, can we get him to the point where we overcome this and now he becomes an inspiration for others, right? So the obstacle now becomes the way. We all have something. I mean, no one goes through this life untouched, right? So, usually those turning points either break you or make you, and I'm determined to help people, not only myself, but others, go through those obstacles and make you stronger instead of breaking you.
Yeah, one of my books that I wrote, I talked about baggage, and the main thing is we all have it, and you have to choose what you want to do with it. You can either let it weigh you down, or you can take it and do something with it. So that was always my philosophy with that, is you use it as fuel, because we all carry it. Every single one of us has some sort of battle. You know, I talk very deeply in my books about fighting depression over the years. And it's one of those things where you have to be able to conquer it and fight it every day. Because the thing is, it's not going away. It's going to be there every day. So you have to have the right mindset to be able to take it on every single day. So I couldn't agree more with you.
Yeah, you know, and even on a lighter note, even with salespeople and with book publishers, right? There's a big obstacle that we all face, and it's called the fear of self-promotion, right? And you have to get over it. And it's one thing, one of the main reasons salespeople fail. You know, it's just they're afraid to get out there and talk about themselves, you know, because we've been taught that that's rude, that's boasting, you know, you should be humble, but you have to get over it. And you know, same thing with the book. I mean, you don't want to, you know, party is like, I don't want to be pushy, I don't want to do this, but I have a good book, and I want people to know about it, and they'll be better off having read it, and you really have to believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, David, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn, even though my LinkedIn page isn't specifically for the book. It's where I like to talk about a lot of these performance challenges, you know, 'cause that's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to get better. You know, whatever our endeavor is, I mean, we want to grow, and that seems to be, at least on the social media side, where people to go to find that information. And there's so many brilliant people that you can interact with there. So I'm there a lot. But, you know, I have a Facebook page. There's a Facebook group for the book called Biology Books. And so I interact there as well. I don't update it as often as I should, as I'm sure none of us do. But, you know, there's a lot of excerpts from the book. You know, there's an audio portion of this where I've put clips from the audio book so you can kind of get a feel for what it's all about.
Well, David, again, I want to thank you for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.